And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit for 40 days in the wilderness, tempted by the devil. In the Carthusian rule, the customs, there is an indication that the experience is common. All those who go into the desert meet these forces. It is not long before the monastic life is set up by that same impulse of the Holy Spirit. In the early Christian centuries, the desert, Syria and Egypt, Cappadocia. And then, as time goes on, it develops in a different form, but in close parallel here in the westernmost parts of Europe, with one thing in common. What was found in the sands of the desert and in the grottos is then to be found in the islands and the highlands and the deserted plains of the Wild West, here in Ireland and also in Wales and in Scotland. They followed an eastern light, and time stands still in the unchanging desert. But that now is under attack, and even these oases of peace become part of the same thing. We do not need the Trojan horse in the form of the television, the invasive gadget in the heart and hearth of the cloister. Why leave the world to become a specialist in the world, in the things of the world, in the language and communication of the world, in the desert? We are playing hide and seek. The way in which the Spirit raised up reformers over the centuries is also an echo of the way in which he pushed and pushed the saints over the early centuries to encounter the beyond here in the present by creating havens of separation where only God had his rights. The Celtic monastic system was very severe. They would engage in extremely harsh penances, such as reciting the Psalter in freezing water, many long hours of prayer and fasting, night vigils, and utter silence. And yet they were available because they did not make a huge separation between active and contemplative. It was all contemplation in eventual action, because that same Spirit was in command and had every right to nudge and push and pull, even to the salvation of souls, in which they became also expert and extremely efficacious. Why? Because God was in the driving seat. The experience of the sound of silence, the rule of perpetual silence, was extremely fascinating and drew and drew. La Trappe was a power of attraction. La Trappe, especially in its uncontaminated form, was truly a reproduction of the desert. One day, keeping watch by the bedside of Frère Marie, who was one of the old lay brothers, the Conversi, who still wore brown, I was keeping my turn to prepare him, or to accompany him, for the meeting with the Lord Most High. No one knew which would be his last breath, but we tried not to leave him alone. But I remember there, in the hours of night, in the infirmary, being beside him when the whole cloister was completely still. The only sound was his struggling and weak breath. And it hit me what mattered and what mattered less. It was also a time of wanting complete and utter solitude, for that was there, of the type known by Julian of Norwich, St. Colette, and the great recluses of history, including our own Dom Damien. And this was haunting me, because the desert is basically nothing but God. Solitude, lived at La Trappe through shared solitude of silence, for silence is the cell of the soul, but also the desire to be physically separated from all else was massive. I remember writing these lines, waiting for his last breath, and wanting also just to be alone, and only alone, with the one who lives, with the one who is alone. The silence of the night is doubly great. The world sleeps on, 'neath blankets of deep sin. The cloister snores, the brethren dreaming wait the call to prayer. No sound doth stir thy din, O buzz of peace, save this, the rhythmic breath of dying lungs, and this, the rhythmic beat of living time. I am alone with death. Thou too, cher frère, alone, the alone to meet. How many ticks, how many breaths rest thee? Thou knowest only that one tick, one gasp shall be thine own. Dimmed eyes, what shall ye see, when in one twinkling vistas new ye grasp? For death we're born. Good Lord, why more hold back? Grant, tombed sisters, grant this blissful